Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'm going to be interviewing Leslie Draffin. Leslie and I have some history. I was on her podcast back in July, the Light Within podcast. Go ahead and check that out. She has a fantastic podcast. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Leslie, Leslie is a women's somatic coach, psychedelic microdosing guide, breath and meditation teacher, and menstrual cycle educator. She helps midlife women embrace their bodies, sex, and psychedelics so they can overcome the wound of unworthiness, get free from mental health challenges, and build a life they're excited about. Leslie believes somatic practices like breath work, along with sacred earth medicine, have the power to bring us home to ourselves, awaken our authenticity, and heal the trauma locked within our subconscious. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you and have this conversation. I think it's important conversation, and I've dabbled a little bit myself, and I'm excited to learn a little bit more, as I'm sure my listeners are. So I know I read your bio, but I always like to ask my guests, what was your journey to doing this work today?
So, my journey really came from spending about 20 years deeply disconnected from myself, numbing out, punishing myself through things like an eating disorder and alcohol abuse that really just, I think, stemmed from getting herpes at age 18. I felt like that really activated this worthiness wound and this feeling that I was unlovable. And so what I did as the eldest daughter, as a perfectionist, is I got addicted to hustling. I got addicted to proving, how good I was. And basically, I really felt like from the outside looking in, the world saw me as someone who was really successful. I was a TV news anchor for 15 years. I made six figures, but internally I was deeply in pain. I would drink every night when I'd get off of the set. I was starving myself. And even when I went into my healing journey, I spent a lot of time with these like Western medical models where I went to therapy and I got prescribed medications. But finally, I think what clicked for me was a spiritual journey that started in 2019. And then microdosing mushrooms along with somatic practices that finally helped me reconnect to my body because I lived so much in my head as someone who suffered from anxiety and depression. And so all of those, I guess, trials put me in this path of helping other women like myself who really feel like they suffer from unworthiness. Maybe they have had issues with body image, sexual shame, and through a variety of modalities, I'm able to help them come back home to themselves.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Leslie. And I'm sure you're not the only one on that journey. So what was the impact on your life that psychedelics, and if you wouldn't mind going through maybe a couple of the other modalities that you use to come to this healing around your worthiness and come out of that needing to prove yourself and your worth?
Yeah, so I think for me, the biggest modalities that really helped were somatic practices like breath work, movement-based practices, but not dance. I felt really resistant to dance for a really long time. And the others were, that psychedelic mushroom microdosing, taking these tiny doses of mushrooms that I really feel helped me to slowly chip away at the wall I had built around my heart. I was told throughout my entire TV career that I was incredibly cold. On TV, I would come across, one way, and then in the newsroom, a different way. And I had a early boss in the industry tell me that I was very cold. And what I've realized now, after being out of TV for 2+ years, is I was never actually a cold person. I was deeply sensitive. And I had to build up this facade around myself so that I could feel protected. But I didn't have the tools to know how to do that in a way that was sustainable. And so what ended up happening for me, in 2022, I reached my breaking point in news. I was suffering from deep burnout, and I added in this mushroom medicine, and it, just like the mycelium network breaks down things within our soil, it like broke down the wall around my heart, and I ended up, really just finally coming to terms with the fact that I was not meant to be in TV anymore. And so I think that practice, along with breath work, along with even meditation, although that was hard for me as someone with anxiety and ADHD, were really instrumental in helping me move into this space that I am now. The other thing that I feel has been instrumental in my healing is cyclical living. So understanding my menstrual cycle, reconnecting and awakening my womb, and learning that there is power in aligning with your natural cycle, even though the world outside wants to tell you something different.
Amazing. I want to go there, but I also want to dive deeper into the microdosing because that really helped me too. I even talk about a situation in my first book, Mom Died Last Night, where I was experiencing grief, and I took a microdose of psilocybin, and 12 hours later I knew exactly what was causing my anxiety that morning that I had woken up with. So dive in a little bit, Leslie, about microdosing, how that helped you and how you see that helping your clients too.
For sure. So microdosing, first of all, is when you take a teeny tiny amount of a psychedelic substance. Most often it's mushrooms, but folks also microdose LSD. And at these little tiny doses, you're not high, you're not tripping, you're not hallucinating, you're not intoxicated. What that can do over time is help things like neuro reprogramming and repatterning self-limiting beliefs and thawing out the default mode network, which is the high-level processing center in your brain associated with your self-image. Thawing that rigidity out of there so that you can start to make headway with things like affirmations, things like positive change in other areas of your life. For me, I began microdosing in early 2022. I immediately signed up with someone who is a certified guide because this was not something I wanted to DIY. I did a lot of DIY on my spiritual journey. I love a good DIY, but I had a lot of internal biases around drugs, right? Like I grew up in the southern part of the United States. My dad's a preacher. Like drugs were bad. If you did drugs, you were going to hell and then to jail. Like hell first, then jail later. So that's how I grew up. So I had to do this work around, is this right or wrong? And for me, it looked like looking at all the other things I'd learned over the last 4 years with my spiritual journey and my cyclical living journey and having to deprogram the belief system that had been really instilled within me from a very young age. So I started a microdosing protocol, and that is just the plan or the schedule of which you're going to microdose. That for me was 3 or 4 times a week for about 3 to 4 months. Now that's a really normal type of protocol, right? You don't sit with mushrooms on a microdose daily. You don't do it forever. It comes to you like a season of life. And so I did that for about 3 or 4 months, had some horrendous things happen, some really heavy things happen, took a big break, came back to it in early 2023 for 12 weeks, and I actually haven't microdosed regularly since then. I have microdosed here and there, sort of like what you were saying, for a specific reason, or I do it sometimes when I'm going out with people since I'm sober and they're not sober. But that's sort of my journey with microdosing. And the way I'm seeing it help clients, which is so interesting, is a lot of people come to me and they've got this deep wound of unworthiness. They feel like they're in their heads. They can't connect with their life. They feel like something's missing. And that's also why I've noticed I've attracted a lot of midlife women, right? We're at this stage of life where we're on the precipice of something new. We're ready to release the things of the past. And I see microdosing and somatic practices really break away and chip away at this internalized belief system that hasn't really been serving them their whole life. And it seems to, like peeling back the layers of an onion, help us get to what we really are internally, at our core, at our truest authentic self, while also gently, and that's the key here, really gently giving us the tools that we need to give ourselves compassion and kindness. Because, when we talk about psychedelics, a lot of the big mainstream chatter is around these big trips that can be incredibly transformational, incredibly dramatic, and I've done those too. And what I love about microdosing is this fits really well into your everyday life because you're not high. And it is a more gentle approach to peeling back the layers of your subconscious so that you can really consciously make moves in your everyday life that feel better. And that's the thing. We want to feel better. And this has made me feel so much better. And I'm seeing it make my clients feel better too.
That's great. It's nice to have these tools in place to help us live a better life. What are some of the themes that you're seeing in women that are coming forward for them that they're able to peel away?
I have seen a bunch of themes around grief. It seems like whatever theme I'm dealing with in my life, like 6 to 8 months later, here come the clients.
Yeah.
So grief is a huge one. Sexual shame, sexual assault, in big ways and small ways. Issues with addictions. Maybe it's to alcohol, or maybe it's just to numbing out in general, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe it's not something that they think is so extreme that they need to go to AA or they need to seek treatment, but they still feel themselves continuously leaning on something that feels more negative than they would like it to be. The other thing that I have found, especially in the last couple of months, I just ran a beautiful group program called Mindful Microdosing, is this theme around anxiety. Overwhelm, burnout, like feeling like I'm always on the go. I'm always in my head. I can't relax. I can't settle down. And so a big theme has been nervous system regulation as well.
Nice. And that's so important, especially these days. Gosh,
Yeah.
we need all the help that we can get to settle our nervous systems and, come out of those programmed coping mechanisms that we find ourselves in.
For sure.
Yeah. What is it about microdosing that can help us kind of, I know, for me, it was really targeted. I went in, I took the microdose, kind of solved this issue I was having, and it was very targeted. So with your experience and helping your clients with their experiences, what other experiences are you seeing besides, just like my experience where I had this anxiety, I took the microdose and, it targeted right in on it. What other experiences are people having?
I think it's interesting that you had that experience. It's probably a sign of how much other work you were doing, because what I've noticed is sometimes microdosing, I'm not even going to say sometimes, a lot of the time, it doesn't give you what you want, it'll give you what you need. And so when we go into something asking it to give us a very specific outcome, I'd say maybe 10% of the time I see that outcome come forward in the time I work with clients, because I work with clients over 8 weeks. And for my own experience, that's what happened. So I asked the mushrooms to help me feel more open to receiving pleasure. I'd gotten herpes at 18 from oral sex, and I was in a really nourishing and lovely marriage that, almost 20 years later, and I still couldn't relax enough to feel pleasure with my husband. And I wanted mushrooms to help me with that. And instead of giving that to me in the beginning, they heard me say I had to become open to receiving. I was so locked up. I was so white knuckling life that they knew I can't receive pleasure because I can't receive anything. And so for me, that's what happened. Is it was this gradual, and it looked nasty, to be completely honest. It was a gradual decimation of these systems that I had in place, my job, my 6-figure job, the beliefs I had around being this news anchor, the identity I had around that. What was my worth going to be if I wasn't that? I lost 2 of my dogs right back to back very suddenly. There was some grief. I decided not to go back to my job after taking a sabbatical from my mental health. So I say to a lot of folks, I think what you experience, Liz, is a little more unusual than sometimes the folks that I work with. But the trusting of the mushroom is what's key here, right? So if you go into this and you ask it something specific and then say, and I'm open and trust and surrender to whatever you know is best for me. When we look at mushrooms as these sentient guardians and guides that I believe they are, whatever happens is for the greatest good. And so even if your outcome, quote unquote, doesn't become, achieved, so to speak, talk to me in a year, talk to me in 2 years. Because in my own experience, a year after I was eating mushrooms at these microdoses, I suddenly had this epiphany while I was on a walk. Oh my God, I actually love myself. Oh wait, and I've had like the best orgasms and pretty consistent orgasms over the last couple of months. Wow, I guess I did get what I asked. It just took a really long time. And that's the key here, right? Like trusting, allowing, surrendering, and doing the work even after you've decided not to sit with mushrooms anymore to integrate what that experience looks like for you.
Integration, yes. But before we get to integration, let's talk protocol.
Sure. So I have a couple of protocols that I will walk people through. The common ones out there are the Stamets and Fadiman protocol. They are created by heavy hitters in this industry, and they are great, right? There's another one that I think the Microdosing Institute really promotes. It's like 3 times a week. But what I started to look at, because I came to this work from the lens of menstrual cycle education, knowing that the menstrual cycle deeply impacts everything about our life, I had this like question mark in my journal from like the first month of my own microdosing routine, well before I thought I'd ever be in this field, working in this field. And it was mushrooms and menstrual cycle question mark. Like, okay, that's interesting. A year plus later, as I'm in this in-depth training, I see that journal entry and I'm like, wait a second here. Okay, if the menstrual cycle impacts everything, it will impact the microdosing protocol too. So we've got to look at female hormones and how that might be impacted by psilocybin. So the protocol that I have promoted and talk a lot about is called cyclical microdosing. And in this method, you split your cycle in half. The first half, those weeks when you don't have a lot of symptoms. You're feeling good, you're feeling hot, you're feeling yourself. It's spring and summer of your cycle. And in those weeks, you're microdosing twice a week. Then when the symptoms come online, when you start to feel irritable, you maybe start to feel achy or bloated, your PMS or PMDD begin to rear their head, you sit with medicine up to 5 times a week. And then you repeat that for 3 menstrual cycles. So that's a protocol, right? Mine is a little bit more in depth than the others. It's also created in alignment with female hormones. But all you have to know when it comes to a protocol is you're going to microdose a couple times a week. You're going to do that for a few weeks, and then you're going to take a break. When you're a beginner, it is important, I think, to follow a schedule. And as you progress with this medicine, sure, you can do it more intuitively. So I usually say 2 to 5 times a week for 8 to 12 weeks max. Then we take a month off.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you pointed out the cyclical wisdom in women, because this is not talked about. It's not included. And when they're doing studies, like what was it? Let me see if I can remember. From 1993, I believe, was the year that they actually started including women in studies. And then they didn't include women to the full spectrum of womanhood from, when we started menstruating on. It was after, we stopped menstruating. So then we have this huge gap in our life where we're not getting concrete details, and it's misinformation.
Yeah.
So thank you for including, here's our menstrual cycle and here's a protocol for us to be able to do this. How did you come upon that? Like that protocol, and that I'm sure from intuition and inner knowledge and practice yourself, but, talk to us a little bit about that feminine wisdom and working with our cyclical nature.
Well, the mushrooms gave me the protocol, for sure.
Nice.
I was definitely microdosing when I came up with it. But I started to really look at what microdosing psilocybin is known to help with. And I had this hypothesis that it was going to help menstruating people probably more than anyone else, because we're more likely to suffer from mental health challenges like anxiety, depression, PTSD. We have cyclical pain, things like headaches, cramps, inflammation, endometriosis, PMS, PMDD. And then also we have a lot of issues with mood, a lot of mood disorders. So the hypothesis sort of started there, where, okay, people who menstruate are going to probably be more impacted by this than anyone else, and no one's really talking about this. And so if I were looking at the cycle, when would I need the most support from medicine, and when do I have the most energy to integrate? So that's why you sit with medicine more in the second half of your cycle. You're having more days where you're eating mushrooms on that season where things feel like crap, right? Like if you're not feeling your best, you're going to be able to have the support of mushrooms, including when you bleed, right? And then when you stop bleeding, the energy begins to rise. You have more outward energy. You can start to look and think back to, okay, what has come up for me during that deeply nourishing 5 days a week on the microdose. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the other thought process was like, okay, when do we need the most support? When do we have the most energy to dissect what's coming up for us? And how can we also make this as intuitive as possible? Because to be completely honest, it's way easier to just say microdose 3 times a week or microdose 1 day on, 2 days off. Those are the protocols that the big heavy hitters have created. But what I like to give people the power to do, and people who bleed the power to do, is look internally and just ask yourself, does today feel like an inward day or an outward day? Do you have any idea where you are in your bleed? If yes, then we can sort of map what you might be doing. Is it going to be the 2 days a week or the 5 days a week? But if you've got no idea, if you're perimenopausal like me and your bleed is everywhere and nowhere, is it an inward day? Is it an outward day? What feels best for me right now? And you can move through it in that way.
Nice. I love that explanation. And it makes us start thinking a little bit differently and gaining some perspective around our cycles, because even with the education system around our cycles that's set up today, we don't go into the depth and the wisdom that, we get when we, start participating in women's groups and start learning about cyclical wisdom and this sort of thing. Then those are initiated by women, and women who maybe desired that in the past and didn't have it, or were blessed to have a mother or a grandmother who had done that, or found a teacher early on to be able to teach them those things. So how can we incorporate this cyclical wisdom, this wisdom of ourselves, into our lives, even if we're not microdosing?
Oh, I love this question. And I love what you said too. It's like, we don't learn these things. When I came off of the pill at 33, it was in the midst of the pandemic. My gyno was like, good luck, track your cycle, let me know how it goes. I'm like, excuse me, ma'am, I've been on the pill for 16 plus years. I have no idea what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. What is tracking my cycle? So I, as the studious little journalist that I was, just like deep dove into all things cyclical living and had to do a lot of that work myself. I should also share, my mother, I'm adopted, so my mother had massive complications pre my birth, which is why she could not have her own children and why I was adopted. So I was not raised around a bleeding woman. So I'm in my 30s having to learn these things. And I think you're so right. Like, we do start to see this more and understand this more when we're in a community of women. But our society has done such a damn good job of making that not feel safe.
Yeah.
To making women and women together feel like competition. And so it's been really tricky. Thankfully, we've got the internet. Thankfully, we've got social media, which has been really helpful for me. But if you're not microdosing and if you're anyone who has a cycle, and we can also talk about those who are no longer bleeding, because I feel like that's an important part of life too. But we'll start with the cycle, right? If you're someone who bleeds, simply start resting when you're bleeding. If you are bleeding, rest. Don't do the HIIT workout at the gym that you signed up for 2 weeks ago thinking that you're going to have the energy for. No, we're canceling that. Don't judge yourself for having less energy. That is when you have the lowest female reproductive hormones, when you're bleeding. That is when you have the highest level of psychic abilities, when you have the highest level of connection to self, to what really matters in life. I have had deeply prophetic dreams and vision journeys and meditations without mushrooms when I choose to do those types of meditations and visioning journeys while bleeding. So that's the first thing you can do. Rest. Then start to track your cycle by simply asking yourself every single day, what is coming up for me right now? How am I feeling in my body right now? Do I feel like this is inward energy or outward energy? What would feel really good for me right now? And so when you can start to understand that within your menstrual cycle, you have 4 distinct phases that I share about as seasons, and they do mimic the outward seasons. So like I said, winter is the bleed. That's when you're in You're with yourself. You're doing the things that feel cozy. Spring is that next phase where your energy rises, you're blooming, you're blossoming, but we don't go too hard because then we don't have the energy to sustain it. Summer is ovulation. That's when we're at the peak. That's when we are magnetic. That's when we can do things like ask for raises, go on dates, have girls' night, volunteer. We're doing the hard workouts. We're super strong. And then the last phase is that inner fall, which is the longest one, which is the one that we get this bad rep around, PMS. But if you learn to live in tune with your cycle, it could become your favorite. It's my favorite of all of my seasons because I'm like the busy little squirrel. Like I'm getting everything done. I'm nesting. I'm organizing. I'm doing all the little fine-tuned details in my business, editing my podcast, editing my YouTube channel. And so when we start to understand that month after month, we are very similar, right? We're very sustainable. We're very predictable, right? Because a lot of times the outward world wants to say, oh, women are so unpredictable, right? Like, can't have a woman in power, that's so unpredictable. We are predictable, but our predictability is month over month, not day over day, because our cycle mimics the moon, and male cycles mimic the sun. So when you can see that and start to live in that, it becomes a superpower for you. It becomes something that can light you up from within. It becomes something that, especially for me, I have learned to see as like my religion. This is my guiding light. Where am I in my cycle? What am I going to do today in order to live in alignment with that? That's the number one choice I'm making these days. And, you know, we haven't really even touched on this, but, you know, as someone raised in the Christian faith whose dad is a preacher and who is no longer a Christian, connecting with the divine feminine and the divine feminine within me was really instrumental in helping me come through all of this, because I really feel like with the mushrooms and with the cyclical living and with reconnecting to my feminine body through things like pleasure practices, I've been able to see that I am holy, that I am divine within myself, and that I don't have to look outside of me for the wisdom that I already have. I just have to learn to remember it.
Let's go a little bit deeper with that, because I think you bring a gift that a lot of people can resonate with, you know, coming from that history and making that switch and coming into the divine feminine and being able to hold that personal power within yourself. So talk a little bit more, you know, to our listeners about that journey and how they could possibly bring that into their life as well.
Oh, that journey. It was a long one. So, you know, for me, it started probably in my late teens. When I got herpes, I got really pissed off at God. And I didn't really understand, like, why that was so sinful and why I felt so dirty. And, like, I don't think if I'd been raised in a different way, I would have had those feelings. I really think that was programming left on me as a form of religious trauma. So it sort of started there, that, like, separation. That feeling of, oh, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm other now. And yet, when I look back, I do remember even as a little kid, like this whole idea of being made in God's image, but yet God is an old man in the sky. I'm not an old man in the sky. Like, how does that fucking play? Like, I don't get it. So 2019 rolls around. January, I have this spiritual awakening under the full moon. I can still feel the moment when I was standing down in Austin, Texas, and like the whole body was vibrating from my head to my like vulva. Like I just felt it all coming online. And that was the moment when I started to really reconnect with like the gateway drugs of spirituality, which are tarot, crystals, astrology, worshiping the moon,
Yes.
like all of that good stuff. So I started with learning to become more in tune with the moon. That was probably like the first thing. What's the moon doing? Oh, okay. And this was before I came off of the pill. So I was not a cyclical person. I had been suppressing my hormones for years and years and years. And I wouldn't be even called to come off of the pill for like 6 more months. But I started by just sitting under the moon. New moons, I would have new moon rituals, full moon rituals. And as a part of my job, because I was still a news anchor at that point, I had this weekly special called Your Best Life. Halloween of 2018, I did a story with local witches at a coven. Because it happened to fall on that day, and I'm like, okay, how is witchcraft like helping these people live their best life? It was great. I had a blast. My Central Texas community did not fucking love it. But I had a great time, and I didn't at that point really think about myself as a witch or want to start practicing witchcraft, but it would come. It would come later down the line. So 2019, I'm really starting to pay attention to the moon cycle. I'm really communing with crystals. I'm doing a lot more meditation, or what I thought was meditation, and really trying to understand why, seeking and asking questions. I've been asking questions apparently since I was 1 year old. I mean, like constantly. So that was kind of how it started for me. Later that year, as I'm doing one of these embodiment practices that I was really, I studied under Alexandra Roxo, who has been on some Netflix shows. She has a couple of really lovely books. She has an amazing insight timer, like embodying your feminine fire, that I used to do. It's like a 45-minute practice. As I'm in one of these, I hear something in me say, you've got to come off the pill because you're stifling your feminine energy. You're stifling what it really means to be a woman. You don't even know. You don't even know. So we got to come off the pill. So I come off the pill in 2020, and as I'm trying to masculine my menstrual cycle, and what I mean by that is doing everything right to get my period to come back, because it was nowhere to be found, I lose my libido, my hair starts to fall out, I get cystic acne, and my self-confidence just keeps taking a tumble.
Wow.
I found this other really amazing teacher, Rosie Reese, out of Australia, who has this company called Yoni Pleasure Palace. And she talked a lot about the divine feminine. She talked a lot about pleasure as a portal to coming back into ourselves. And so that's when I really began to connect to the womb. Now I'm going to come back to the question, right, about this coming back to the divine feminine. When I slowed down enough to understand that I didn't need to do all the right things to fix my period, to fix my hormones, and instead I could relax and just release and begin to just feel more play and more pleasure and more fun in my life. That was, I think, a really instrumental part where I started to understand that is the feminine. The feminine is that. The masculine is this feeling within myself that I had had for so many years, where I had to do and achieve and go and hustle and get it right and make the right choices and all the shoulds. And the feminine was the coulds. I could do this. I could do this. I have these choices. I can flow and feel free. And so that's kind of the start of it. You know, after this, I really got very deep into working with female divine feminine archetypes. I call 2022 my Kali year. Like, it was an absolute, like I said, decimation in order to like cleanse the life, to let the goodness rise. Mm-hmm. And I still really do align with that term witch. I really do, especially this time of year. All my witchiness comes back online the second a leaf turns. I'm like, oh, we're a witch again. I feel like that for me just is someone who is in tune with their natural rhythms, who honors the mundane aspects of life, who finds the connection, the beauty in the smallest of things, and has reverence for plant medicine and earth and the duality that exists within us all, outside of religion. And hopefully that answered.
Yes, it did. It was a fabulous answer. Thank you so much. And I want to go back to reconnecting with your womb and your journey to that. Can you dive in a little bit there? Because I think we're in a time of reconnecting to our womb, to stepping into the divine feminine, to really bringing it online and bringing it forward.
So my beginning journey of connecting to the womb really was that year in 2019, where I felt deeply within myself that I was meant for something more, but I couldn't figure out what. And so I would do these meditations where I would like imagine, you know, a light, a crimson light, like emanating from my womb, like down my vulva, like out my body. And I started to play around with like, what is even intuition? Because before this, I was deeply alcoholic, anorexic, and bulimic, on Adderall, like using all of these things to numb out and disassociate from my body. And so in 2019, although at that point I'm still drinking and I'm still in an eating disorder, I at least had this thought, okay, well, we need to start reconnecting to this thing we've judged so deeply. So as I would do these meditations, I would start to feel this like internal nudge. You got to get off of the pill. Or I would hear something else. You got to do this, or you got to like cut that person out of your life. And little by little, I started to notice, oh, well, that is my intuition. Well, they always say intuition is the gut, like that gut feeling. For me, that is in my womb. The gut and womb are right back to back, right? I mean, they're deeply connected hormonally, physiologically, through the fascia. So I started to just say, well, that's like my womb speaking to me. My intuition is my womb. Yeah, it's in the womb. And so as I began to reconnect with that more via these meditations, via just like belly massages, that's when I heard the call, come off of the pill. After I come off the pill and things are going haywire, I'm like, okay, how can I go deeper into this? And that's where I learned through Yoni Pleasure Palace's Golden Yoni membership. So Rose Reese's Golden Yoni membership, which is chock full of the most amazing material for like dirt cheap. I learned a lot of these beautiful techniques that were trigger point massage in the vaginal canal. So it's sometimes called cervical de-armoring. Yoni mapping is another way of calling it. So if you're going to Google these things, cervical de-armoring, yoni mapping is usually what you'd find on Google. But what it truly is a meditative trigger point massage where you're to yourself, although some folks do this now, especially here. Well, they did it in Australia, and now I know some folks here in the States who do this as practitioners. Mm-hmm. But it's massaging the vulva, thinking of the vulva, and by the way, if you don't know what the vulva is, that's everything you see on the outside of your genitals. Starting there and thinking of it like a clock. The clitoral hood, 12 o'clock, 3, 6 o'clock down towards the anus, 9 over to the side. Thinking of it like a clock, starting with an external massage, then either with fingers, or I used a glass pleasure wand. You can also use crystal ones. I have those as well. Mm-hmm. To slowly go into the vaginal canal and massage that area, breathing through it, putting on some juicy music, going slow. And I started to do this in 2020 as a way to connect to my womb. And the shit that happened was wild. So I immediately, like one of the first times I'm doing this massage on myself, I'm about, I'd say probably 3 inches into the vaginal canal on the upper right quadrant. I feel this pinch, and then it's like a pins and needles, and I suddenly hear this man I had dated after I got divorced say, "You fat bitch."
Wow.
I had not thought of this man in years, and yet there he was. That limiting belief, that thought, that little trauma stuck in my body. So what I started to understand is that the womb and that fascia hold on to so much. I like to say the womb is your energetic junk drawer. You stuff all the shit in there that you don't want to look at because physiologically it's a bowl. Like there's places for it, right?
Yep.
So I was massaging and I heard that, and I heard some other things, and I would think about my ex-husband. I'd think about the guy who gave me herpes. I'd think about all these different things, and I realized that, oh my goddess, like it's trapped there. It's trapped in this area. And what am I going to do to get it untrapped, unstuck? And so womb reconnection for me became a combination of those massages and deep breathing into the womb, thinking of yourself almost breathing through the vaginal canal up into the womb and then back out. Clearly you don't breathe in through your pussy lips, but like, you know, this is like a visualization. Breathing them in, breathing it out. And then when I added in the mushrooms, it was like the final beautiful, like, chef's kiss, because it really started to help me peel back. Okay, now that you have identified that this is stuck there and you're breathing through it and you're releasing it, what else can you do to stop living your life subconsciously by that man's horrible words to you? Right? Like, how are we going to completely flush this out? Mm-hmm. The other thing that mushrooms helped me when it came to this is to come to terms with the fact that I'm not the mother of a child. I never will be a mother of a child. That is by personal choice. And yet I felt for a really long time that I was stuck in maiden. I'm like, I'm too old to be in maiden. I'm in my freaking mid-30s by now. This is motherhood, right? But I'm not a mom. Like, am I mom? Like, I was real confused about that. So my first big trip with mushrooms, I invoked the goddess, I invoked the mother, and I saw myself in the womb. I saw the trauma I had gotten on myself from my birth mother, from my birth experience, being ripped from her womb as she was 13. and going into foster care for a month, and then going into, so I saw these things happen to me. I saw my dog, who's my soulmate dog, come to me as a human child and guide me through that whole experience. I felt like I was in labor at times. And so it was this like wild experience of reconnecting to the womb, of reconnecting to what it means to be mother, divine feminine. And so all of those little things are, I guess, the ways that I have been able to do it. And womb reconnection looks like anything that you can think of. Drawing the womb, looking at your vulva, doing pleasure practices with yourself or with a partner. I really think that, this is creative life force energy, that this is where it comes from. And so when it's gunked up with the BS that a past lover has said to you, or the trauma that you may have had from your own birth experience, or from sexual assault or sexual shame, you can't live fully in your light. You can't feel vibrantly lit up. And so for me, that's why it's been so essential in my healing journey. And it's still ever evolving, and it's, I think, individual to every person.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for speaking into that, because that's been part of my journey too, is reclaiming my pussy. And it was a glorious day that it happened. And it's incredible. And it was through those practices, through the de-armoring, through realizing, like through my energy work, like, oh my gosh, my body holds on to all these thought forms and belief systems and trauma. Of course my yoni would too. Yeah. Of course my vulva would too. Of course my vaginal canal would too. And yes, I've had similar experiences. Thank you for speaking to it, about doing the de-armoring and having these people or images or things pop in. And we need to rid ourselves of those. We need to clear all of that so we can fully step into who we are, and, past the trauma, so we can just let it go for good, because we don't need to hold on to these things forever. We can clear these and they can be gone. We don't have to sit with them anymore, or they don't have to play out in our mind anymore, or our bodies, or our actions.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, so thank you for speaking to that. For a woman who is looking for, like, oh my gosh, here's these fabulous exercises. How do I implement them into my life? You do embodiment coaching. Talk to us about, being embodied and what that looks like for us and how we get there.
I think that if you're looking to start, what I would, first of all, don't just start by trying to de-armor your cervix. That is like elite. That's like senior level. We're going to start as a freshman, right? So like the freshman level is, can we connect with the breath? Can we begin to understand just how we're breathing naturally and what that might be showing us that we're holding on to? I've got ADHD, so like my current hyperfixation is breath. And I have been noticing, I just lost a dear friend last week, just to super suddenly. And I notice how much I'm holding onto all of this. And I'm just like, okay, so if you're beginning, let's just see how you're breathing. What's the breath doing right now as you're listening to me talk? Are you breathing in your chest? Is it in the belly? Can you feel it in the back of your neck? The second thing I would say, as far as embodiment and how we begin, is, can you touch your own body? And when you do, what comes up for you? So as someone who had been anorexic and bulimic since the age of 15, and who has now stopped dieting and gained significant weight, it has been a deeply triggering process for me to touch my body, especially on my belly and my thighs and anywhere that I have felt like it's more fleshy, right? And yet, becoming more in tune with those triggers and that awareness, and still doing things that make you not triggered, right? So I don't touch my body and my belly sometimes. Like, I don't touch the places that feel triggering, but I'll touch my arms or my legs or my hands and feet or my face, right? So can you become more in touch with literally touching your body and how that feels for you, right? Especially if you're someone who's been deeply disconnected. I have this 9-minute practice that I developed over the summer called the Shift Method. And it's 2 minutes of journaling, 3 minutes of breath work, and 4 minutes of movement. Now, I said already, I was deeply resistant to dance. Like, when I started in 2019, all of the embodiment practices were ecstatic dance. Like, that's what everyone and their grandma was doing. And I'm like, ick. I want to theoretically twerk, but like I also can't, like it just, I don't know. So the shift method involves 4 minutes of movement that looks like shaking, stomping, letting your hands move, cat, cow. And sure, the song that I have created with the playlist that goes with this beautiful little free ebook, yeah, you're going to want to twerk eventually. You're going to get there. But like first, just can you shake the body enough? Can you bounce on the balls of the feet? Can you do some hip thrust while you lay on your back? Can you cat cow? And so I think all of those are really nice freshman level embodiment practices to help you start to come back in touch with yourself. Because the thing is, our society does a really great job of disconnecting us from our mind-body connection. The mind is what is so revered. It's what we're known to be really praising. Oh, she's so smart. She's doing so well. She's achieving so much. Look at her. She's got a 6-figure paycheck. To be honest, for me, that feels a lot mind connected, right? Versus, oh, she's taking her precious time. Look at her, like in her rest, in her play, in her pleasure. So with the shift method, I've noticed that the women who do it really do heal the mind-body connection, because you start in the mind with journaling and then you drop into the body with breath and movement. And so it's there. Both of them are there. But I think that would be where I'd start, is starting a shift method, which I can give you the link to put in the show notes, the beautiful ebook that I literally just finished.
Perfect.
And start to touch yourself. You don't have to go and masturbate. You sure can. I sure say hope you do. But like, how can you just really gently and lovingly touch yourself? Maybe instead of showering, you take a bath. Maybe instead of lotion, you use like a nice body oil, right? Maybe instead of just going about your day without thinking about it, you can just give yourself a little hug. Just squeeze your body, right? Yeah. I think those are all really nice, easy steps to start.
Yeah, and gosh, when you were talking and then you got to, I forget which point it was. Oh, I exhaled. It felt wonderful. Oh, I know. When you were coming out of like the masculine approach and into the feminine approach, my body just exhaled. It's such a difference. And I've even been thinking about that recently. Like, how do I come out of that, direct, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to make this, we have to make that, and just come into, back into my body and back into my intuition and back into my flow, and just keep on scooting those programs, because there are programs that keep coming up that I'm not doing enough, or I'm not doing this or that, and coming to like, no, like I'm living a life in flow from my intuition, in joy, from my womb wisdom. Like, this is where it's at. This is what we should all be doing. So thank you for speaking into that. And then you also, like, when you're doing those practices, you integrate the microdosing in with it. So how do you combine the two?
So I combine the two by encouraging people who microdose to do the shift method every single day. So I just finished running the first cohort of mindful microdosing, which is a 30-day group program. And every single day I encourage these women to do the shift method. And so when they're microdosing and shifting, what I've noticed is they're more likely after that 9-minute practice to go even deeper. So I really think that it works really well together, because, the way psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, which is what we're talking about here, the way it works in the brain and the body is that it starts to work with the serotonin receptors, which live in the gut and in the brain. And so that's why it starts to thaw out that default mode network where we've got that really rigid self-limiting belief, the really rigid self-image. And so if you're someone who has been living in their default mode of unworthiness, of bad body image, of anxiety, microdosing can help to soften those things. And so then when you bring in shift as well, when you bring in the somatic practice, now you have these positive little changes that you're showing as you're reprogramming your brain. Oh, this is now my default mode. Mode is no longer let's talk shitty about ourselves. Mode is we honor and seek our sensations, and we flow through life in a way that feels juicy and feels good. And so I think that's why it's been really helpful. But what I've also seen, and it's important to point out, is resistance comes up. Resistance is big, not only in somatic work, but in microdosing too. Sometimes shit gets worse before it gets better. And so what I've noticed with the shift method is when challenges do come up for people who are microdosing, and it could look like uncomfortable emotions. Week 2 of this program, everyone was just in their feels. Everyone, shit was hitting the fan for everybody. And so it's like, okay, when those uncomfy things come up, we now have a tool to help us shift out of that and a way to honor those things versus stopping them and pushing them away and stuffing them down, swallowing the thoughts, swallowing the feelings, and not letting them become fully expressed. So I think that's how they work really well together. But I would suggest to anyone out there who just wants to try, the shift method is 9 minutes. It's free. You got access to it for free. And let me know how it works for you, because it completely changed my world this summer. I lost the dog I mentioned who had come to me as my human child, passed away in May. And I do not recommend that you microdose or a full dose journey with psychedelics when you're in an acute stage of grief. And I was like, there's no way I'm touching mushrooms, but I have to do something. And so I had been doing these longer practices, but I couldn't stick to it. I was so in the grief. I was in my head. I felt like I should be working on my business, but now I have to grieve this dog. And oh, it's a dog. Like, what am I doing grieving this dog? It's just a dog, right? All the thoughts. And so I crafted this little 9-minute practice that I used every single day to help me move through that grief and then come out of anxiety that came up after grief for me and move through feelings of unworthiness that come swirling in sometimes. And so I've really felt, from my own experience that it's such a lovely, nourishing practice. And when people microdose, they're even more likely to stick to it. And it's just been such a beautifully sustainable practice for the folks who are microdosing. So they've just gone really well together. I'm really pleasantly surprised.
Nice. And we're circling back as we're coming towards the end of our interview to integration. So let's talk a little bit about integration and how that plays a role in embodiment, in microdosing, in, unraveling and unpeeling the onions that we are.
Beautiful. So the shift method stands for seek sensation, honor what comes up, inhale, flow, and take stock. Nice. The last step is take stock. Take stock of what's come up for you. What does that look like for you? And it can be as simple as, I did it literally, I shifted 3 times before this interview. So I was like, okay, what's coming up? I need more. What's coming up? I need to do it again. So shifting and that taking stock moment is a tiny little bit of sneaky built-in integration in a very quick way. Okay, what just came up for me? How am I feeling compared to how I felt before? And now what can I do next to continue this feeling so that I don't go back into the old feeling, right? So I don't go back into the anxiety or the tightness or whatever it is. Integration for me really just means you're making sense of the messages that have come up for you. And so in a microdosing practice, that looks like things like journaling. It looks like things like tracking your data. And it looks like making sense of these aha moments that might not have felt very big at the time, but over time have really become really impactful. So I'll share a story of a client. So I was working with this person, and 6 weeks seems to be like the juicy spot for when I'm working with people. First week, 2 weeks is we're getting our dose down. We're figuring out, we're flowing. By the weeks 5, 6, 7, shit's on fire. She's telling me this story where her husband had been cooking wings or something in this cast iron skillet, and he left it in the kitchen sink for her to clean. And she's like, let me tell you, previous to this, I would have flipped out. I would have flipped my shit on him. I would have been so mad about cleaning this pan. And yet I find myself on this microdosing day, like luxuriating in how the gel feels in my hand, like the soap feels in the hand, and how good it is to like get this done. Like I'm achieving something to clean this pot, right? Whatever it was. And I realized, and this is her still talking to me, I realized that, I'm not even that mad at him. Like this is a nice, beautiful little moment for me to pause and to do this thing that 6 weeks ago I would have been so upset about. I'm like, oh well, this is your moment. This is the turning point. This is the pan moment. We always went back. We called it, what's the pan moment of today?
I love that.
And so it was like this little moment of brevity and this like clarity that came to her that said, oh my God, that's the shift. My neuro program is shifted. Like, I have created a new neural pathway, and now instead of flipping out about this, I'm choosing to respond in a different way. I had a different client. Similar, it's always their husbands who do some stuff to piss them off. This one, there was something had happened at the bus stop where they were letting their children off to go to school, and he had said something to her, and she like looked at him, and she realized in that moment of looking at him that a month before, previous to microdosing, she would have let him have it completely, and instead she just took a breath and just decided to respond in a way that felt good for her. And I think I can't remember exactly what she told me she did, but she was like, it was such a turning point because I think he realized what he had done in that moment that would have made pre-mushroom me flip out on him. And instead of us having this like massive moment of, separation, we were able to very quickly and consciously, okay, let's reframe what the argument was going to be. And so all of that is to say that integration looks like a million different things. And at its very core, it's how can we make sense of the messages that have come up for us? And how can we make those messages into actionable change so that we can have a positive shift in our life?
Oh, that's beautiful, Leslie. And that's golden right there. That shift, that new neural pathway that allows us to just respond and observe instead of react. And that those are the moments where we know that we have done our work and we have reached a new plateau, which is an amazing feeling, I know from myself. Yeah. And I'm sure these women were feeling the same way. Leslie, this has been such a fantastic conversation, and I have loved everything that you have shared, but I always ask one final question. What is a jewel of wisdom that you would like to leave the audience with today?
I would just say the jewel of wisdom today is to, and this comes from just where I'm at right now, give yourself permission and space to deeply feel the things that you need to feel, and know that you don't have to go through things alone. I, in the beginning of my healing journey, very much was like a solo practitioner, very much a solo healer. And I think that when we are on this journey and we start to leave people behind who aren't on the journey too, it feels deeply dysregulating and very, very lonely. And so I would say find your people. If you can't find your people, find me and I'll help you find people. But understand that we don't heal in a bubble. When we can heal in community, especially as women, we've talked about those women's circles, that's when things shift so dramatically. Mm-hmm. And so give yourself the space to deeply feel the things you need to feel, and also find a community where you can be witnessed in that too. Because there's just something that happens when we're deeply witnessed in the feelings. And I've noticed this in the groups I've run. I've noticed this in the membership that I have. And in my own grief journey specifically, it's like when you can be witnessed in that mess, in the messy, especially by other women, one, you start to realize, oh, this is not uncommon. This isn't me being weird. I'm not just unusual and strange because I deeply feel this thing. You start to understand that your unique experience is very much mirrored by many other people, and that develops that connection, right? Mycelium network, what these mushrooms are growing from, is a deeply connecting network that wants us to heal ourselves so that we can heal our collective and the community itself as well. And I think that starts with giving yourself the space to feel, knowing that that's not bad to feel the things that you feel, and that finding that community is that next right step.
Well said. Beautiful, Leslie. Thank you so much. That was perfect. I love that. And how can people reach you?
People can find me on Instagram at Leslie Draffin. You can check out my podcast, The Light Within, which you were on. And then if you have questions or you want to connect, you can always book a free one-on-one discovery call with me. I would love to chat about ways I can support you. The shift method I will give to Liz to put in her show notes. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you so much for joining me on Raise the Vibe with Liz. It's been such a pleasure to host you. Yeah, fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being a part
Thanks
of.
for having me.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for joining us. Again, I'm Liz Peterson and this is Raise the Vibe with Liz. Check out Leslie and go find her on social media and her website, lesliedraffin.com, I believe it was. And you can find me at raisethevibewithliz.com and on all social media platforms at Raise the Vibe with Liz. Thanks everybody and have a great day. Remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Bye now.